My Govanen, welcome to Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and continuing the Silmarillion Synopsis series, we now come to Quinta Chapter 23 of Tuor and the Fall of Gondolin, which, though it's one of the last stories in the Silmarillion, is actually one of the first, if not the first, that Tolkien actually started working on way back when he first started conceiving this entire mythology. This is a relatively short chapter, but it's very densely packed, and it's basically the last of the great tales. So there is a lot of information to get through, so let's get started. Backtracking a bit from where we left off in the last chapter, we have to go a little bit back in time, because this story begins with the birth, more or less, of Tuor, who is Turin's cousin, shortly after the Nirnaeth Arnoediad. And after that battle, Rion, who is the wife of Huor and the sister of Morwen, of course, who is the mother of Turin, she basically despairs and flees Hithlum and goes into the wild to live with some elves who were kind of just wandering around. They weren't any of the Noldor. They were some of the Grey Elves who were still kind of in the area, but were at this point basically living as outlaws. She gives birth to Tuor while living with them, and after doing that, she goes to the Mound of the Dead that was piled by the orcs after the Nirnaeth, and basically just dies there out of sorrow. And Tuor is raised by the elves for about 16 years, and at that point they decide, we're not staying here, it's too dangerous, we're going to go south to the mouths of Sirion. But unfortunately, before they can get out of the area entirely, they're attacked by orcs, and most of them are killed. Tuor himself is taken captive and enslaved by some of the Easterlings living in Hithlum. He lives that life for about 3 years, and then escapes, and then lives on his own as an outlaw for about 4 years. And then, at the end of that period, Ulmo, by means which are not exactly explained, basically kind of puts it in his heart to go west and try to get to the sea. He then makes his way westward, and he finds a cave that was built by Turgon's people, which was used to hide their movement to Gondolin when they originally had lived in Nevrost. And finding this cave, he goes through it, and it leads to basically an outlet of a river to the Great Sea in the west. And when he finally arrives there, he becomes enamored of the sea, and it tells us that the unquiet of it that it causes in his heart eventually leads him into the depths of Ulmo's realm. It doesn't tell us exactly what that means, and that comes much later in the story, but bear that in mind. Tuor basically kind of just hangs out for a while near the shores of the sea until finally he sees some swans flying south, and he takes them for a sign that he's waited around too long and starts to follow them. Eventually he comes to Vinyamar, which originally was the city that Turgon lived in before he built Gondolin, and going into the city and into the king's halls, he finds the armor that Ulmo way long ago had told Turgon to leave so that the messenger that he would eventually send could wear this, and by that token, Turgon would know that he was from Ulmo. Tuor finds the armor, takes it and puts it on, and then he goes outside again, and there's a storm coming out of the west, and out of that storm, Ulmo himself appears to Tuor and basically tells him, I'm sending you to Turgon in Gondolin to give him a message because he needs to basically leave Gondolin. The doom of Gondolin is about to come, and tells him, I'm going to bring you somebody who can help you get there. And he also gives him a cloak which will help hide him from any of his enemies to make sure that he can get there in secret. After the storm passes, which is a really, really big storm, he later finds standing by the walls of Vinyamar a elf named Varanwe, who is the last surviving mariner of the last ship sent by Turgon to the west. And it turns out Varanwe is the only survivor, again, because Ulmo, basically saved him out of the storm. He was basically driven back by, the forces of the Valar trying to make sure no ship could reach them. But Tuor tells him what Ulmo had just told him, and Veronwë therefore agrees to take him to Gondolin. On their way to Gondolin, they end up going by the pools of Ivrin, which you may remember was where Turin had, drunk after killing Beleg by accident, and then also where he ended up coming north in his, attempt to go find his family in Hithlum. It just so happens that Tuor and Veronwë, when they come to Ivrin, this is the same time that Turin is passing north through the same area, and they see him. It doesn't tell us who he is, but it says they see this man who's dressed all in black going north, calling the name Finduilas. So we know it's Turin. They don't talk to each other, and this is the only time the paths of these two cousins actually cross. But they just let him go his way because he seems kind of crazed and, not very happy. They let him go, and then they continue on. Eventually, they do come to the hidden entrance of Gondolin, and they enter, and the guards at the inner gates basically stop them and arrest them, essentially. And then Tuor is brought to their captain, and he takes off his cloak and reveals that he is wearing the armor that Turgon had left in Gondolin long, long ago. And so they take him to Turgon, and Turgon, of course, knows who Hurin and Huor are, so he has an idea of who Tuor is once he declares who he is. And then Tuor, kind of inspired by Ulmo, gives a message basically saying the doom of Mondos is working its way towards its conclusion. The doom of Gondolin is near. You need to leave and get out of here before basically your entire civilization is wrecked. And Turgon remembers all of this, and he remembers Ulmo's warning to not love too well the works of his own hands, but he also has come to really love Gondolin, and he's a bit prideful of its secrecy and its strength, and no longer wishes to leave. And furthermore, it tells us that the people of Gondolin don't really want to mingle with the affairs of the outside world. They just kind of want to stay put and do their own thing. And Maeglin, who of course you'll remember is Turgon's nephew, is also very against the idea of leaving, though it doesn't really indicate that he has any malicious motives for this. So in the end, Turgon eventually rejects the Council of Ulmo and decides to stay. However, Turgon is now worried about the possibility of treason because of the warning of Ulmo, remembering, of course, that that is a huge element of the Curse of Mondos. And so he blocks up the hidden entrance to Gondolin and basically says nobody gets in or out, nobody leaves, nobody does anything. We won't take any refugees. We are closed to the world. And this, that basically means that no refugees can escape there. Nobody can seek refuge there at all. And in the meantime, Tuor decides to remain in Gondolin because he's become really enamored of it. It's one of the most beautiful places he's ever seen. So he stays there, and over time he becomes very great. He learns quickly from the elves. He's a man both of great physical stature, and he's capable of learning a lot from them. So he becomes a very great man within the circles of Gondolin culture. And he also comes to love Turgon's daughter, Idril. Now, you may remember that Maeglin also loves Idril, but by law couldn't really marry her because they're too close kin. And Maeglin, finding out that Tuor is in love with her, just hates Tuor because of this. Turgon, on the other hand, remembers Huor's prophecy in the Near-Ninth that from their two houses a new star should rise, and having come to love Tuor himself, he doesn't hold back, and he allows Tuor to marry Idril, and this becomes the second union of elf and man. The next spring, Idril gives birth to a son to Tuor named Eärendil, who is, it tells us, has a light in his face, and the sea, which he has never seen, by the way, speaks in his heart and ear like it does with Tuor, and that will become very relevant later on, both of those things. In the meantime, Morgoth has been looking for Gondolin because thanks to Hurin basically shouting, in public, he knows more or less where Gondolin is, but he still can't find it because the eagles still guard the region around it and prevent any spies from getting too close. So he's been thwarted up to this point. However, in defiance of Turgon's command that nobody leave the circle of the mountains that surround Gondolin, Maeglin, in search for, other metals to mine and things, because that's what he does. Often, apparently, in secret, leaves the circles of the mountains and goes in search of these things. And at one point, he ends up getting lost and eventually captured by orcs. And you can probably guess where this is going, but yes, he is taken before Morgoth and basically threatened to be killed, and to save himself, and with the promise of getting Idril for himself and becoming the vassal king of Gondolin, reveals to Morgoth basically everything he needs to know: where Gondolin is, how you can assault it and take it, basically gives away the store. Morgoth, of course, is extremely pleased with this, and to make sure that nobody suspects anything, he sends Maeglin back to Gondolin, where he can basically pretend everything is normal and nobody's going to wonder, hey, where's Maeglin? He's been gone a long time. So the doom of Gondolin is indeed drawing near. Idril, however, has been foreboding that something really bad would happen, and in secret has been preparing a tunnel basically out of Gondolin that would lead way out into the plain as a way of escape should anything ever happen. So luckily there's some preparation on the other end. When Eärendil was 7, and at a time of festival, because that's the way these things always seem to happen, Morgoth decides to attack, and he sends everything. Dragons, Balrogs, orcs, wargs, you name it, everything is coming to Gondolin. The people of Gondolin are waiting the rising of the sun, because that's the festival they're at. It's the gates of summer, they're waiting for the sunrise, but the light begins in the north, and it's really red, and they realize, oops, we have a problem. So they get ready for the defense, and with the attack, there's a lot that goes on, but the main things are Ecthelion, who is associated with the fountains and a great captain in Gondolin, ends up fighting Gothmog, the captain of the Balrogs, and they both kill each other, basically. One of the few times a Balrog actually gets killed in the Silmarillion. In fact, the first recorded instance. And Turgon himself ends up dying in his own tower when it finally collapses from all of the destruction that goes on. Maeglin actually tries to kidnap Idril and Eärendil, but Tuor comes up and finds what he's doing. He's been fighting in the defense, but then comes to Idril because they're going to take the way of escape that she's been building, and finds Maeglin trying to make off with Idril and his son, and he starts fighting him, and fulfilling a prophecy which you may recall from the chapter on Maeglin, he ends up throwing him over the wall, thus bringing to pass Eol's curse that he would die the same death as Eol himself. So Maeglin ends up dying, gets nothing for his treachery, which, at least that's something to go for. But anyway, Tuor and Idril lead as many people as they can through the way of escape, and it goes to the north, which of course is where the forces of Morgoth came from, but for that reason, Morgoth's armies didn't really expect any escape that way, and so they were kind of overlooked. And it didn't hurt that the fire of the dragons and all of the fountains in Gondolin combined to make a really big mist, which basically covered the valley and hid their escape. So they begin to climb into the mountains, which are, despite the fact that it's summer, they're so high that it's really cold and it's a really nasty place to be. And they're working their way through a pass, and they get ambushed by an orc horde that was basically left there in case anybody did try to escape. And there's also a Balrog there, and things look pretty dire. But Glorfindel, whose name you should remember, basically fights the Balrog and throws him, along with himself, over the edge in a very similar act to what Gandalf does. So they both die, and eagles come and basically sweep the orcs off into the chasm as well, so the refugees are saved. And Thorondor, the king of the eagles, goes down and recovers Glorfindel's body, and they give it a burial before they leave the area. The refugees now come to the river Sirion and go south, eventually to Nantathrin, the land of willows, where they take some time to lament the fall of Gondolin. Tuor himself makes a song of the sea and the coming of Ulmo to him, and giving him his role as messenger. He makes this song for Eärendil, and the song awakens in both of them the sea longing. The refugees then make their way further south to the mouths of Sirion, where they join themselves to the refugees from Doriath, who are basically headed up by Elwing, the daughter of Dior, and they join together, and they have also friendship with Círdan's people who are on the Isle of Balar, and they take to a shipbuilding life, sailing and doing this sort of thing. And because Turgon, who was by right the High King of the Noldor after Fingolfin and Fingon had died, he is now dead as well. Now Eärenion Gil-galad is named High King, although there's not much of a kingship left at this stage. But anyway, as they do all this stuff, Morgoth gives no sign that he knows that they're there. And it could be that the story tells us he just isn't worried about them because it's just a bunch of refugees and who cares, or maybe he just doesn't know about them, or maybe he's just trusting that eventually Feanor's sons will go after the Silmaril and finish off any work that he needs to do. And in fact, it tells us that Morgoth doesn't even begrudge the fact that he lost a Silmaril because of all the destruction it's now caused, referring, of course, to the fall of Doriath. It tells us now that Ulmo, at this point, goes to Valinor where he doesn't normally go and speaks to the Valar and basically says, look, we need to help the elves, guys. It's getting really bad over there. But Manwë didn't do anything. And the story basically speculates that maybe he just couldn't do anything until the Oath of Feanor had run its course and basically finished all the damage that it was going to do. And it also mentions very significantly that perhaps they had to have some kind of messenger come and speak on behalf of elves and men other than Ulmo, somebody who is, a little more personally connected. Back in Middle-earth, it tells us that Tuor eventually grows old and, with the sea longing in his heart, decides that he's going to build a ship and sail west with Idril. And to what purpose, it's not exactly clear, maybe to seek Valinor. But once he sails west, he is never heard from again. But it is believed by many that alone of mortal men, he has been joined to the fate of the elves because of his great love for Idril and the other elves of Gondolin. So, does Tuor live forever? Don't know. But it would be kind of a reverse case of the Beren and Luthien story, where Luthien becomes mortal. Here it would be the mortal becoming an elf, which would be very strange. So that's the story of Tuor and the fall of Gondolin. It's really interesting because this is one of the stories that is extremely compressed in the Silmarillion. Tolkien wrote a much longer version where he gives a lot more detail as far as the actual fall of Gondolin itself, whereas here it's kind of treated in a very short fashion. Not a lot happens. But it's nevertheless a very important story in the cycle, and we are now coming very close to the end of the Silmarillion. There's really only one more chapter left in the Silmarillion proper, and then we get the Akalabaith, which I will also cover, and then there's the Rings of Power in the Third Age chapter, which I haven't read in a long time, so I'm not sure if I'll cover that or not, but I'll definitely at least consider it. But that was this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do give it a thumbs up and share it around. You can follow me on Twitter at JRRTLore to get some occasional random Tolkien trivia questions that you might want to answer. You can, of course, subscribe to the channel here. Don't forget to click that bell icon. You can support the channel here, and you can find 2 of my previous videos here. Until the next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek signing out for the Tolkien Lore channel. Namarie.